Hi guys, and welcome back to Having Fun with Chemical Theory. This is activity 4 for year 8, looking at atoms. In the previous activities we've been looking at the idea that materials can exist in the form of a solid, a liquid or a gas. What we're going to do in this activity and subsequently in activity 5 is to look at how these particles, what these particles actually look like. We're going to look at the study of atoms and then how the atoms are orientated within the periodic table. So what's the story behind the atom? Well, the atom was first theorized by a Greek philosopher in the 4th century BC called Democritus. He basically stated that all matter was made up of little particles which couldn't be cut. If we broke everything down to their simplest state, we'd end up with these little balls which he called atoms, or in Greek atomos, which means indestructible, indivisible, can't be cut at all. Later on, it wasn't until the 18th century when a British scientist called John Dalton came up with the theory, or added to the theory of Democritus, with the idea that all things were made up of atoms. However, as it's occurred now in the 21st century, we have a good understanding as to how an atom is set up. Okay, so let's recap. Atoms are basically small, they can't be cut, and they will exist in the solid, liquid or gas forms. Now these atoms can exist either on themselves, for example like helium. Helium basically is lighter than air, it's an element, and basically as a gas it exists on its own, it's in a singular form. However, sometimes these atoms can combine together. For example, oxygen. When they combine together they form what we call molecules. So for example, oxygen you'll know as the formula O2, and if you see on the diagram here we've got two little blue dots joined together. Those two dots basically make up the oxygen molecule. There are two atoms that make up one molecule. So this is how it's found in nature. Sometimes we have atoms of different types which are combined together. For example, water. Water is made up of two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom joined together. In the diagram below you can see the oxygen represented by a blue dot and the hydrogen represented by a purple dot. These combine together to form water H2O. The H2 meaning we've got two atoms of hydrogen and the O meaning we've got one atom of hydrogen. So in water what we've got is three atoms that make up a molecule, and there are two elements, there's oxygen and hydrogen. So what actually makes up these atoms? Well, the atomic structure took a long time to actually be discovered, but what we know of now is that the atom is made up of three tiny particles or subatomic particles. They are protons, neutrons and electrons, and they're described either by their mass or their charge. Now, protons have a mass of 1. Neutrons also have a mass of 1. Electrons have a mass of 0. Now this doesn't mean they don't have a mass at all, but their mass is so small that it has no effect on the overall mass of the atom. Hence it's called 0. As well as mass, we've also got a charge. Protons have a charge which is positive. Neutrons, and if you gather by their names, are neutral. They have no charge. And finally electrons. Electrons balance out the positive charge of the protons by being negative. So the overall charge of an atom is 0 because the protons and the electrons balance each other out. So the next part that we need to look at in our story is where do we find these protons, neutrons and electrons? Well, there are two definitive areas where we will find these particles. These areas are the nucleus and the shell orbitals. Now we will not be talking about the shell orbitals in any great detail, but just be aware that for every atom we've got a dense nucleus, and then spinning around the outside we've got these shell orbitals. But where are these particles within these two areas? Well, what we'll find is whenever we draw an atom, we draw it in using circles. Now these circles represent the two main areas. On the outer area we've got the shell orbital. Now these contain the electrons, and they are spinning around the nucleus. Now obviously, because the electrons are negative, they are represented here by the sad face. However, the other area is the nucleus, and in the nucleus we have the protons and the neutrons. This is positively charged, so it's a happy face. Now, what we need to understand about the nucleus is the nucleus is responsible for all the mass of the atom. Remember, the electrons have very, very little mass at all, so as a result it's only the nucleus that will give the atomic mass to the atom. So that gives us a rough idea as to the structure of the atom. Join me in activity 5 when we're actually going to be looking at the periodic table, and we'll look in more detail as to how the periodic table shows us the number of protons, neutrons and electrons within an atom. Thanks for watching.